think about as you embark on a journey of business automation using process redesign and intelligent data. So let me start with you, Vivek.
Hey, and hello everybody, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Vivek Murthy. I look after OSS and platforms for Rakuten Symphony. I don't know how many of you were there yesterday listening to Rakuten has done some special things in Japan. Started as a e-commerce internet kind of company, and then fintech, all kinds of things, businesses, and then moved into telco about 8 years ago. Built the infrastructure ground up, very, very software centric. And and so therefore, the journey has been always about doing very, very digital stuff, very, very platform approach. And even the infrastructure things, if you just extend the digital concept, it goes down to doing things as infrastructure, as code and all that. So those are all the kind of foundational principles that have underpinned the journey of Rakuten, where I work. We're going to taking a step back, ultimately, this is all about two things, economics and customer experience. And when I say economics, I mean, mostly telcos have traditionally been about bottom line, efficiencies and operational stuff. Now, increasingly, we're talking to our customers who are talking about top line, and that's a very interesting conversation in its own right. And then, obviously, the customer experience and the ability to reduce MTTR and just get to the root cause and fix problems rather than just respond to incidents. The key thing in all this is, as you go into that kind of digital journey, it's not just because it obviously is a huge advantage when you're trying to scale and grow, and because you're obviously not throwing bodies as you kind of grow in volume and everything else. It's what happens as a result of that, talking about foundational, is the kind of data you collect. And networks and infrastructure, all of you know in the room, is incredibly complex. As much as we try to simplify the presentation of that in terms of the products we sell to our B2B, B2C customers, the underlying infrastructure, if you lift the bonnet, massively complex. And it's the data you collect which is where the sort of gold dust really lies. And it's that ability to then use that data, bring it from all the disparate networks, your fixed, wireless, access, being able to bring that together in a unified way, massive foundational piece. And that's where all the kind of benefits can be brought together, to bear in terms of harnessing that data, understanding what's really happening in the network in terms of the faults, picking up the signals, reducing increasing the signal to noise ratio. That's all the good stuff that comes out. So that's the world we live in and talk to our customers about, and very exciting space.
Super. Thanks, Vivek. Masood?
Yeah, my name is Masood. I'm from Capgemini. I've been with the company for almost now 25 years, and mostly in the telecom field. So I have seen different phases of the network, how we build the high-speed wireless networks, and then even the wireline side, and then going to the programmability part and intent part. I think this is the most exciting part right now from the network perspective, because network always throws a very complex challenges. We thought that we have solved this problem when we have a software-defined networking, but we have seen that there are gaps where you always need somebody to look after your networks, and now we have reached to a stage where we have large language models which are coming up, and these models provide an immense opportunity for us to automate this network, which has been our task for, I would say, last 20 years. We always try to maintain these networks, and network becomes complex day by day. And as you see today, we have quality of service. The expectation from network is very different today. So this whole automation has been a journey, and now we are at a place where we can automate and we can run these network autonomously as any other systems where you can take some complex decision and to run these kind of a network. So I think we are at a very interesting time right now.
Perfect. Manav?
Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Manav Gupta, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for IBM Canada. So no rest for the wicked. I've done my tour of duty, spending about 15 years in the telco industry building inventory management solutions, fault tolerance, network performance management systems, and so on and so forth. So I know we're not allowed to use the moniker AI, so whether it's Taylor Swift or whatever you want to call it, the adaptation of that when it comes into the network, some fundamental rules still apply. So as is the norm with the rest of the industry, if we think about AI as a technology only or technology first, those projects tend to die on the vine. So I think for Canadian telcos, and from sort of my vantage point, the way I like to think about this is, I think number one, we gotta have a clear thesis on the value, whether it is cost to serve, whether it is customer retention, revenue per subscriber, pick one and run with it, and you gotta own that. Number two, especially for Canadians or Canadian telco operators, I think we have to bake sovereignty into the solution rather than an afterthought or a tax. And that's becoming increasingly important, especially with all the dialogue that's happening geopolitically, all the rhetoric that's happening across the border. So how do you design, whether it is autonomous networks, self-healing networks, how do you build AI into that, and how do you ensure that the data doesn't leave the geopolitical borders of the country, serves the Canadians, you can protect it, you can ground that, you can monitor it and govern it. I think that's a very clear element there. I think number third, and the final one I'll say, is that we gotta measure ROI on the actual business outcome rather than the capabilities of the models that we tend to pick. And what I mean by that is, rather than talking in terms of I've got model A, B, or C from a generally a frontier model provider that happens to sit south of the border, when you integrate that model into your network operations, how are you extracting meaningful business value from that model, whether it is for reducing MTTR, whether it's for customer acquisition, reducing latency, ensuring QoS, and so on and so forth. So what we're beginning to see is, I think we are just into early stages of implementing this technology, whether it's large language models or foundational models, and the journey is in front of us. So what we design today, the systems we design today, are going to provide us value in the next 3 to 5 years.
Super, thank you. Dean?
Hi, Dean Bubley from Disruptive Analysis. I'm the guy who's been asking the annoying questions from the front of the room. I'm going to take a different angle on this, and I think that for me, one of the things that sometimes gets left out of the discussion around automation and AI and networks is remembering the real physical world and the importance of lots of things which you can't do in software or which are not necessarily things that can just be assumed to not matter. So I'll give an example. If you are automating quality of experience on a network, but you are in a basement conference room where the wireless infrastructure is run by someone else other than the carrier, and you don't know who owns it, what it's based on, what it can do, who owns the data that's created from wireless use in this room. Is it federated with carriers? Who knows? Mm-hmm. Or other physical examples for fiber network. I'll give a quick anecdote. Someone realized that they had differential performance and quality from some of their street-side cabinets versus others. And it wasn't until someone actually went out and looked at them and realized that the ones which were painted green held more heat than the ones that were painted silver. And actually that was what was causing the higher failure rate. And so there's all of these sort of physical world things we can add into that. Where is the energy coming from? Where is the compute physically? Where is the memory physically? All that stuff has a huge impact on whatever it is that we can automate. And if you don't pay attention to the real world and live in the world entirely of software, you might miss it.
Yep, important details. Walter?
Yep, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm Walter Miron. I'm an independent consultant, and I will be non-specific so as not to date myself, but I have a multi-decade career in designing, building, operating, and large-scale networks and large-scale transformation projects. I think my colleagues have captured some really great points about ROI, about having a purpose, the pillars of the platforms. I want to take a slightly different approach. Is that all of that, and I agree with all of that, but I want to also talk about internal team members and leading the change, because I think if we as senior leaders we need to be advocates for the change. We also need to sell the purpose of the change, that ROI, there's a lot of, especially around, I know we're not saying AI, but especially around AI, like there's always anxiety around change. But when we think about AI, team members are very worried about this space. And I think if you can articulate that this is actually going to help with some of the more tedious aspects of work, we're all faced with ever increasing service levels, always on, facing down more advanced and more ubiquitous cyber attacks. The tools are going to help team members be more successful in meeting those goals. And we need to lead that change for them, and not just be advocates, but also put the training in place, capture the value that they bring in order to train the models. So I think those sorts of things are also really, really important as we make this shift. And I'll just close by saying I am actually a Swiftie dad, and I was impressed with the response to the traffic in Toronto during the conference.
Wonderful, thank you. So all excellent different points in terms of what's important for success. Let's talk a little bit about the foundation or the what to build on. And maybe I'll sort of keep it segregated a little bit, because we could, when you talk AI native or Taylor Swift native, all the different capabilities of the stack and all the processes, like it can be a wide and deep conversation. But maybe I'll turn to the technology vendors. Manav, for example, what's important in the fabric, the architecture, the foundational principles to to build on? What's important?
So I think it's important to think about at least the following three pillars, in my opinion. So number one, think of the tech inside the network function, then outside it as a service layer, and then around it as an orchestration layer. So 3-layer stack right there. Number two, I think we should start thinking about the AI solution stack, tech stack, not as a technology stack, but more as a fabric, because these 3 layers have to talk to each other. So in that scenario, and apologies because I'm a technologist and I get paid to talk about technology acronyms, you got to start thinking about adopting emerging protocols. So MCP style routing as an example, inter-agent communication. So you have an agent that's doing an RCA, and then it ends up deciding that there is a configuration change that has to happen onto the network. Do you have full traceability, observability into the agent's actions? How do you do some kind of a kill switch so that you don't have cascading failures onto your agents, as an example? So everything around telemetry, observability, repeatability, regulatory compliance, that entire fabric has to be thought out, so regardless of the user function eventually, but you have to start thinking about that fabric. And I think the third option I'm going to say is around having a first-class curated data. So too often, what might be an AI problem really turns out to be lack of a AI-ready data problem. And without naming any of the vendors or any of the telcos, I worked with pretty much every telco that is in Canada, and everybody faces the same challenge. So ironically, what I used to thought were problems we were solving almost 2 decades ago around building a network topology, building a finely curated data set about what's in the network, blast radius of a network, RCAs, that problem still seems to exist. So unless you have that curated data set ready, you're going to get limited automation that the technology is promising. So that's how I would answer in terms of the enabling foundation layers.
Yep. Now, all very good points of the different parts of the fabric, modern orchestration, and of course the foundational element of data and its models and its topology. Anything to add to the foundational side, Vivek?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only thing to add here is I think I absolutely agree. And a lot of these things, guardrails that you've got to put in place. The way to approach this is people are, seemingly looks like a paradox, because on the one hand you're talking about sticking at the foundation level, talking about autonomous, kind of going to level 3, 4, and all that, and that's all laid out nicely in the standards, guys. But at the same time, you want control. So nobody wants black box solutions, to be deployed in a thing and saying, right, I'm going to just watch. You want the ability to be able to, intervene. And so you have to deal with that paradox where on the one hand, you want to get into that autonomous, you want that intent and all that kind of decision making to be done by agents in the future. But you've got to take your engineers in the journey with that, and you want that ability for them to put a stop, kill switch, whatever, and say, right, I don't understand what's happening, I want to get in. So having that ability to kind of be in both worlds is super important as an approach to take. And I think then you'll get the confidence to get on this journey, because people do get scared about, it's nice to say autonomous, but everybody's at levels, whatever, 1, 2, 2.5, 3. It's the leap from 3 to 4 where it becomes incredibly difficult. And we have done that in certain use cases in Rakuten. And it's not easy because you have to trust and you have to be able to explain and all that. And so I think dealing with all that is extremely important in the way you approach, in the world of AI.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. So why don't we then take, the business principles, the currencies of the Taylor Swift Foundation, and turn it into some, use cases globally. So in your travels across the globe, and I would agree with you that we're done level 1, level 2, partially 2.5. We're sort of going up that logarithmic hockey stick of complexity. So let's say you've got the foundation, irrespective of the use case. Like let's open it up to, could be network based. It could be any of the customer life cycle. From offer to cash. It could be customer experience. Like irrespective of the use case, what do we see as practical successes where people are starting to get some measured outcomes, right? And some learnings from those outcomes. What are the use cases? Dean, maybe I'll start with you. What do you see in your travels?
I think one of the most interesting that I've seen is probably from Elisa in Finland, which runs a dark network operations center and has progressively automated its sort of operations and fault management over the last many years, to the extent that I think it's actually productized the solution that it has, and its time to fix and mean time between failures and failure prediction metrics are very, very good indeed. So I think that's probably one which I'd highlight. A couple of other things that I'd say is that sometimes AI is not. It's certainly not Gen AI. It's more machine learning, which turns up in right down in the guts of cellular radio networks. And I think that whether that's the work that 3GPP is doing at the moment on things like beamforming and channel estimation, but there's a lot of work that's going on already, which is almost unglamorous and not discussed because it runs on loop cycles. There's a really good slide from Ericsson yesterday, which said that some of the stuff in the radio network runs on microsecond and millisecond control loops, rather than the seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks that we might think of more on the OSS, BSS side of things. And so I think that we need to think of the different time cohorts here over which the AI cycles work. And I don't think we're going to have one platform to rule them all. I think there's going to have to be some breakpoints where it makes sense, whether it's topology or in terms of timing. So sorry if that's not a concrete example, but I think it's an important framing.
No, it's good.
Yeah, I did place and did time, so I've got the relativity.
What do you see, Masood? Do you see in your global world of Capgemini and helping people build this stuff?
Yeah. So one of those use cases that I have seen is around diagnosis of the problem, whether it's a RAN problem, whether it's a fixed network problem or code problem. And ultimately, it is, let's say, it's a diagnosis as a service. And essentially, when you look at how you are going to diagnose a particular service, you are using knowledge graphs and mechanisms. What we have seen that with the large language models, you have decision makers, because we tried to solve this problem earlier with Bayesian inference and other aspects. But we have seen that now you can actually take some decisions around that, and these services now produce much better results in terms of diagnosing the problem. You still hand over the whole call to a human operator, but we see lots of successes that we are building it. And I think one of the key points that Vivek also brought in is the data part. So data harmonization is really required across different systems. If you have it, we have a system where you can actually build some use cases which can give a business value to our customers.
Walter, any thoughts or in your travels and journeys?
Yeah, maybe I'll reference one from TELUS, but I think order to cash in B2B, I think is an interesting one in that, and if you think about in a very manual process, you can have large order fallout, right? Just in terms of end to end, and I think there's been some success in taking sort of a end-to-end automated approach to initial provisioning, and I think that now there's we have to be clear, and I think you mentioned it enough. Data is important, right? Because if you don't have if you haven't rationalized the data beforehand, then if you have gaps in inventory and things like that, then you're just going to have order fallout more quickly, which maybe is a benefit because it's faster. But but if you get that right, I think there's an opportunity there to really streamline the end customer experience as well as the provisioning operator experience, and have a benefit of cleaning up recording because you then have an automated install that has gone end to end. So I think we've seen that at TELUS, and they've made good strides there. And there are others around predictive failure analysis and things like that that are actually very meaningful.
So in some of these examples and use cases, do we see any that have gone past ML to LLM focused insights into business automation and really into building the agents and agent to agent? Like, are we still scratching the surface? Is there any examples of automated agents?
I've got two very different ones that I've seen, and I can't remember or name the specific operators. So one which was intended to assist on enterprise customer onboarding by helping to use Gen AI to automate all of the niggly things in the procurement process of, you need to fill in this disclosure form, you need to fill in these contractual details, the relevant people involved. There's like 17 pieces of paperwork. And actually using Gen AI to sort of try to reduce the heavy lifting involved. And the other one, which was completely different, was someone talking about agentic AI for what to do for subsea cables during a failure, where if you have a cable break at 3 a.m, someone in the ops center who probably doesn't, cables break occasionally, has probably got a dusty ring binder on a shelf and is trying to work out what to do. Whereas in fact, if you've got the agentic platform and you essentially say, what do I do first? It sends agents off, one to the, maintenance operations to get the nearest cable ship on the way to where the break is. You need to have another one that goes to the compliance department and says, do I need to inform the foreign minister of whoever it was country that got disconnected? And one that goes to the sales and CRM system saying, which of the top 10 customers most effective, and here are their phone numbers. And for me, I'm like, I don't know much about subsea cables, but that made intuitive sense to me.
Yeah.
It's probably quite repeatable, the example that you're sharing. Anybody else on
Sure.
the A2A side?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a couple of examples. So let's try to separate sort of some of the jargon from reality first. So you have the large language models, which are predominantly trained on publicly available data, right? Pretty much everything that's available on the internet has been consumed, legally or illegally. Let's stay away from that. But you then have a baked-in model that has, for practical purposes, all of the data of humanity that these things have churned through repeatedly, and you have this multidimensional representation. That's your LLM. You then have to ground that LLM with enterprise knowledge and enterprise data. That's the telco operators' network, their topology, their manuals of how to do RCA, how to do triage, how to break fix, and so on and so forth. So we are globally, regardless of the country, we are in very early stages of that agentic AI adoption. We have seen lots of examples in adoption in AI-assisted RCA, These are low-hanging fruit because you can build multiple agents. They can read data from these corpuses, and they can do RCA. I think that's easy. Agents in OSS, we are beginning to see that sort of into the level 2. Where things get really gnarly and fall apart is inter-agent communication or agentic orchestration. So you talked about A2A. So A2A is a protocol that came out of Google. The idea behind the protocol is if two technology vendors, they build agents, we need a common fabric for those agents to talk to each other. And just like how when two humans talk to each other, we might be talking about the same topic, our context is different, right? I am the sum total of my experiences and history just as everybody else is. So we are approaching the problem from different spaces, and how do we get these things to talk to each other? We are in the infancy of doing that right now. I want to be very clear. What is probably even more interesting, and I'm not trying to sidestep, but what's more interesting is how can you take this agent, really it's an LLM, but how can you take this agent and give it your enterprise data and context repeatedly? So I talked about previously MCP. So think of it as I'm giving the agent a capability to call a function either in the network or around the network or in a customer-facing function like order to cash, et cetera, and take some corrective action. I think that alone is green space, green field right now. And I'll end with this. So I'm sure, quick show of hands. Anybody heard of OpenClaw? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you are using this? Okay. Anybody heard of NetClaw? So there is a Canadian innovator who used OpenClaw. OpenClaw is open source, right? Until NVIDIA acquired them, and then they have the whole division, and they have Nemotron models and so on and so forth. So there is a Canadian innovator who took OpenClaw and they created a network version of that. And I swear there's a reason why I'm telling you this story. So think of how humans operate in a NOC today. They have these massive, beautiful screens with all the displays and so on. Those are designed for humans to consume, and the network is a living and breathing entity, which is changing rapidly, right? Milliseconds, microseconds, and so on and so forth. No human can consume it. Can I now have these agents absorb this data, and I, as a human being who's tethered to a phone such as this, can now connect to my NOC, and over a pick your messaging application or pick your channel of communication, whether it's WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever, I can now voice, and I can now make a corrective action. So my NOC agent doesn't have to be up 2 in the morning and log in. I'm logging in on this. So we got to start thinking about new ways of delivering and tackling the network issues. I hope it sort of gives you an answer of where the world is going, and as well as where it is.
Yep. No, it's a very interesting example for sure. So let's move into some of the true learnings, right? Different areas of learnings, right? That are good for everybody. So in no particular place in the list. We talked about culture and organization and risk and skills. We talked about the legacy debt that's there, that's not AI literate, that we have to deal with, right? The data, the access, the applications, the sets of vendors that are there. Talked a little bit about process redesign, right? In terms of, let's not just overlay something for the sake of automation. Let's take a look at it and connect business and technology together and relook at the process conditions. There could be the regulatory, sovereign framework side, different types of architectures. What do you think are the top learnings so far? And I'll just, send it down the panel. What should we take and learn from and move forward?
I think you kind of said it all there. You got to approach it in the right way. You want control, you want autonomous, you want both of those things. So you got to be able to traverse that journey. You also want to, unleash creativity in all this, and that's super important because every every customer, every telco has their own quirks in it, the kind of customers they have, B2C, B2B, the kind of products and services, and to unleash that creativity and have their own stamp of their own personality in terms of how they run their operations, how they got to figure that out and lead that as their kind of North Star, right? And I will give you an example of that. A lot of times you see that, you take the example of security. Sorry, the way you look at security is often about safeguarding and all that, and denial of service and all that. But actually, it's also to do with the availability of a network itself for the customer. And how do you basically bring the two together? Because you can see packet drops in the security side, actually then being a network service issue at the same time. So do you want to learn from that? And you can't do it any other way than to get some of those people mashed together in the same kind of NOC, SOC, and all that. So you have to have those operating models in place when you go about doing things. And I go back to the data side of it, learning. And give an example of, we had the Tokyo Marathon, and there was an outage in one of the areas as the athletes were going, and the media and some things, the service went down. And by the time that was picked up in the NOC, it was like a couple of hours later, 45 minutes for getting the data and all the, the PM KPIs and fault alerts and everything else. And by the time you had the humans do something about it, the guy's gone, it's too late. So we then had to work and figure out how to get the data in a matter of a minute. So a lot of this AI and agentic stuff that we're talking about in the foundational piece, you've got to get the data at the right time in the right fashion and be able to do something with it, otherwise it's too late. So these are the kind of learnings we have had. Energy savings, for example, again, the same thing. You've got to be able to really understand when to switch off an indoor cell, right? You have to marry what's the agents and what the algorithms are telling versus what's the reality. So you have to keep your feet on the ground as you kind of start to go on this autonomous and agentic journey. Keep checking against the economics of it all, and I think you'll be fine.
I think the use cases that typically we have seen where we have got most of the success is that where we are applying generative AI or large language models for the language part. And when I say language part, for example, if you are managing a cluster of servers, you typically spawn using YAML files. And I have seen that when you deploy, even if with your engineer's productivity goes up substantially. If he is managing, let's say, 50 servers, different type of workloads that is coming up, and there are different type of performance issues that you see because of the mismatch of the drivers and all that, and these systems, they are very good in absorbing lots of data at a very rapid pace. So for example, for a human being to look at what is this specific driver, whether it's a compatible or not and all, they can take that decision very, very quickly. They can also configure your YAML files just like that. I mean, before you realize, you have the whole template available to you. So one is, of course, you can have an agentic systems where you go for autonomous part, but I have also seen that when you are debugging, when you are managing servers and other aspects where you are dealing with lots of data, these systems are very, very effective in terms of giving you the results.
Super. Any thoughts, Manav?
Okay, so question was around learnings, right? Lessons learned and so on. So maybe I'll give you a practical view on this. So any AI project, or I think the belief used to be, you just take the technology, you apply it on anything, and you'll get magic. It clearly does not work out like that, right? So within our own organization, we basically adopted a 4-step process of eliminate what we can, simplify what we cannot eliminate, automate what we have simplified, and then infuse AI. That's the last step. I think if you go down on that 4-step journey, you'll find that you can get value, and I'll say extraordinary value, in every part of the business. So case in point for IBM Corporation, 3-4 years ago, we were running 6,000 applications to run the IBM company. I mean, maybe we need 6,000, but it sounds like a big number. We have since shut down about 2,000 applications. We have taken about $5 billion in cost. That couldn't have happened if we did not do the things that I talked about. So you certainly need a data fabric that works in this multi-cloud hybrid type of an environment. You need a data models that unlocks the value that's existing in these silos. And then you need a layer of governance for your AI so that you can be assured that your AI is performant. To me, that's the most practical three-step process on how you go about extracting value.
Perfect. Dean?
Okay, I'm not an implementer, so I'm not going to go down the same paths as my co-panelists. I will say one of the learnings I'm seeing at the moment from service providers is that as soon as you get involved on AI, the regulatory and compliance surface expands hugely. And especially if there are concerns around sovereignty, there may be concerns around intellectual property, there may be concerns about whether your network is either considered critical national infrastructure or is being used to manage other critical national infrastructure, and therefore goes into a higher risk category for under the whatever AI legislation comes through. And all of this changes. And there's like certainly if I look at UK and Europe, I'm less sure about Canada, is there's separate rules on AI models, on data centers, on data management and ownership and location and residency, on encryption and telecom security. And all of a sudden you touch many more of those surfaces. And I think that's not necessarily going to stop everything, but it does mean that unfortunately there's probably a room full of lawyers who need to be dealt with as well as the engineers.
No, it's a very good point. So it's it makes you think across a whole fabric of surfaces, right? It's like going through the setup and the get rid of what you can't automate, simplify, then go into the automation and do it in a set of pragmatic steps. So very
the risk is that you do all that, and then there's the department who like to say no.
Yeah.
Who come out and cause problems.
Nope. Very true. Very true. Which is, why the sponsorship, I would say I'd add that to the word governance, right?
Sure.
To make sure that, you're well endorsed and sponsored right across the whole organization. Walter?
Yeah, one of my colleagues here mentioned it as well. I want to take maybe a pragmatic approach, because when you think about a large-scale network, right, you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices supporting millions of endpoints, and so that infrastructure is in, it's in its life cycle. And so, as we look at moving to the new technology, and as a young engineer, I was always very excited about the newest, shiniest thing, of course, right? But we do have this pragmatic view of implementing. So we were talking about lessons learned, and I think that there's, the network has become software enabled, software defined. The network is you're selling features now. You're not just selling pipe, and as it matures, I think there's we can more and more adopt a more agentic approach with the platform. It becomes the platform, and we have that maturity. But I think there's some component of the network that is legacy, and we have this legacy rigidity we need to work with. And I think there's a more generative AI approach there. Like we can use the LLMs, we can build the models, we can build that that information for the operators as we can pass that up the chain into other platforms. And then we have some portion of the network that it's going to be very difficult to move into this, and we should focus on retiring that one aspect and moving on, and just having that trajectory. So I think as I've looked at this over the last few years, I think there are different stages. It's not just the network as software defined in the platform. We have to do something about to tackle the legacy rigidity. So I think that would be probably my biggest learning in this case, and it means the fascinating journey, though, right?
No, they're all good examples, and I think about all the the different places that we've all come on this stage, and all the years of experience, and I also. Are we doing enough industry association, consortium, conversation-wise, or is this too secret sauce, right? And we tend to, keep it to our chest. So I think about that sort of paradigm, quite regularly. Not looking for an answer. I'm just,
But I think we will see that the operators that expose capabilities through AI will outperform the operators that just automate legacy processes.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about exposure too much here in terms of, exposing to the third parties and the over-the-tops and the developer community and, anybody else that you want to leverage your asset base from, but that's another important. Sorry, Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a couple of good forums for discussion that have cropped up recently. So I went to, there's an event called FutureNet World, which is all about automation.
Yep.
In London a few weeks ago, and they do, I think, Singapore and somewhere else as well. And that was like a pretty candid set of conversations and presentations by operators on, what does it mean to be at different levels of autonomy, and there's a lot of good stuff there. I did a private event for a BSS OSS vendor that was all about sort of agentic orchestration, which was some genuinely good, candid comments, which unfortunately is like, well, I'm the Chatham House, so I can't talk through it. And I would imagine that at the TM Forum event in June, there's probably going to be quite a lot discussed. So I think there's quite a lot of knowledge sharing.
there is
well
good
as sort of
knowledge sharing? Okay.
internal proprietary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll just add one more thing into this. I think in this day and age where we are on the cusp of biological neurons being overtaken by artificial, all conversation that is pertinent to systems that are critical for human survival, those discussions all have to happen in an open forum, in open source. So my exhortation to all Canadian leaders is that be on the side of open and open source. Don't just be a consumer of AI from a frontier AI model provider. They generally tend to be south of the border. They're generally closed source. So you're buying into an ecosystem that you have very little control and certainly very little visibility into, right? Open source, open weight models is the way to go because you can inspect what's there, right? You're able to then adapt those models and fine tune those models to your scenario. And then lastly, I'll say, you got to bring your people along with you onto the journey, right? So there are certainly low-hanging fruit, whether it's in HR, whether it's in back office IT systems, OSS, et cetera. I think this is also an opportunity to perform the culture change. And I think you had mentioned the tech debt that we have, which some of that is us as humans, right? We got to be candid that, okay, we grew up certain ways, we are set in our ways, we have our own blind spots. How do we now transform ourselves as we transform our organizations and societies? So that would be my 3-step recommendation because that's something we're trying to do ourselves.
No, perfect.
I was going to just add one other thing from a telco industry perspective. Fundamentally, it's the connectivity is in the networks. And I don't think we should beat ourselves up if we are a bit slow on the agentic journey as far as the network, the healing and everything else is concerned, because you can do it in the upper layers, the applications, the business side of things, but in the connectivity, you just can't mess it up. So I think you're going to see that kind of baby steps being taken to get to that, all the wonderful stuff. But you have to start with that, and I think the pace will take its own time. I mean, we'll be here in, 3 years' time, and we'll still talk about agent to agent. I think there are not many use cases there because it's just not easy to let go of that control at the network and connectivity level. So.
No, all well said. So as we come to a close, thank you to all my esteemed, wise, experienced panelists. I guess I would say that we're all rock stars, and we are here for hire. So we're here to help, and I hope you found it beneficial. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coleman.
I'm fascinated by.
Good to meet you.
Awesome.
Thank you.